Just a quick note here, well, we'll be moving to the articulation of the outline next, but just before that I wanted to say that I added a pretty good YouTube video on actually measuring proportions into the Great Art Tutorials video section, well, the playlist on YouTube I've made for you guys. It's by Simplified Drawing and Painting, and it's called something like "You Are Measuring Proportions Wrong," so very clickbaity title, but it has the sort of basics of this kind of measuring and mass drawing and all this kind of stuff. It should be very useful, as it's pretty hard to demonstrate here with this project, since you can't see what I'm measuring on the figure unless I go into post-processing very extensively, which is a huge amount of work if I do it for the entire figure demonstration, which is multiple hours long. So it's easier for you guys to just check out an already pretty good video on the subject and be done with it. So I'll be sharpening my pencil here. Just I'll start using the HB a little bit as well for this stage, but again, I think I'll first start off with the 2B pencil just to get some initial placements right, and then we'll start really sharpening those up with the HB, especially on the shadow side. We can drop the knitting needle here, and everyone always loves to go straight to the portrait, so let's just go in there and start refining things. One advantage is, instead of moving very close to the figure in the figure room, we can just simply zoom in a little bit on the picture we have. Photos are pretty nice in this regard. Don't have to bring binoculars, which some people honestly do in the figure room. Slight mishap there. It's not supposed to be overlapping with the neck, as the neck sort of overlaps the jaw there. So should be fine enough. I'm not being too picky about the outline here on the hair, because we don't have to make it sharp. We don't want to make it sharp either. One thing that defines hair, as a thing we draw, is basically it's pretty soft in its edge. On the photo, of course, it's razor sharp, because that's how photos work, but we won't be making it that way. We want it to feel a bit more like hair, but we try to be accurate with the drawing. There's a little bit more of volume here on the back of the head, on the hair. With hair we can also design a little bit. Hair is very moving on the figure, especially hair is sitting. The hair is going to be a little bit different, which makes sense, because the model has moved and so does the hair. So we have to design a little bit when we're working in the figure class. Here, we can pretty much just copy what we're seeing. This isn't easy by any means, but this is definitely comparatively easier than working with a live model. So this is a good place to start. So if you can do something like this in the studio, and then you decide to attend one of these schools that teach figure drawing, painting, then maybe you might be a step ahead already. I'm just gonna go in and clean up some things over here, since it's not looking very much articulate, let's say. It's just not, you know, sharp enough and defined enough for my tastes. With the hair, we just leave it a bit fuzzier, but now that we get back to the contours of the figure, we really want to make it nice and well defined. At this point, I'll just move to the HB so I can get a little bit more sharp and precise. Since some of you guys might be doing a transfer drawing here, just make sure to really clean up any lines that, you know, could create ambiguity. Sorry, ambiguity. You know, because if you have a thick line, something like this, you know, you have room to create, you know, 3 different widths of a parallel stroke there. Basically, if it's very, you know, messy, fuzzy, something like this thigh here, for example, there's, you know, almost a millimeter of space where I could be drawing the articulation line when I'm transferring. So this this could create quite a bit of inaccuracy in your drawing if, like, after transferring, so you have to really like redraw some things unless you really take your time and be accurate here. The transfer process itself is a little bit annoying in that sense because it does require you to redraw some things as well, and it's just extra work basically, unless it's really necessary. So that's why I'm not really doing it here. So laziness, also being just trying to be at least smart about my time, which is not exactly the definition of starting this whole course project in the first place, but within these parameters I want to be smart. Okay. I will probably go and lighten some of these lines in a later stage. This is pretty light as an area, so we don't necessarily need a very dark outline there, but it's pretty easy to lighten these things up just by rolling with a kneaded eraser. You can just sort of generally you can sort of just generally lighten things up that way. And this I want to leave in place for now because it's gonna be a little bit softened and lightened in any case with the big form modeling that I will be applying to the very edges of the figure. So we'll see what you know the outline looks like after that stage. Also, this separation is not very important really. Actually, I got rid of the shadow there as well, so we'll need to redraw that as well, but let's just make the outline accurate first. See, the shadow is so thin on the edge that it looks like just a searching line when I put it in there. A little bit less accurately, but I'll actually just get rid of this shadow line for now, since it's not really helping me with anything. Just looking for the placements of the fingers here. So, you know, very finicky business. They are largely just defined by the shadows they cast here. So I shouldn't probably be doing this with the HB, since I do want to be able to nudge things around without making a super permanent mark on there, which the HB, with a little bit of carelessness, I could easily make it a pretty tricky mark to erase. This pinky needs to be a little bit longer as well. I also feel these days like this, it's pretty hard to, you know, get away with just measuring things rather than just sort of looking at least a little bit into how these things work, you know, anatomically speaking. That said, I'm not the greatest, you know, draftsman of all time. I don't really draw human figures, at least at this level these days. But you know, it does help to have a little bit of experience, of course. I'm just sort of deciding that the shadow shape goes around here. Maybe we can just sort of design a little bit and connect it with the distal head of the ulna that is kind of popping out of there. We don't really see that being a part of the shadow, but I want to connect it there so it's just one shadow shape and not just, you know, multiple teeny little ones. I think that's just better as design. So yeah, luckily we only have 2 fingers there to tackle, so we can get away with quite a little bit of information. Just trying not to make it look, you know, super bad in a standing out kind of way. I guess I should set my bar a little bit higher. Okay, that's that for the hand. Just keep drawing over here. Also, we can switch back to the HB, which is a little bit better here. I'm just gonna lightly pass this with the kneaded eraser to just take a little bit of that dark tone off. I maybe got a bit carried away there. Don't need it that dark. We need it accurate, not dark in tone, so just keeping that in mind. Perhaps let's put in some information over here as well. So this crease over here, just gonna sort of connect it with this edge of the thigh so it feels a bit more natural. I'm not super concerned with the sharpness of this line because it's gonna be modeled. So also we're gonna try to lose that line anyway. It's gonna be some kind of tone against some kind of tone on the other leg over there, so we don't necessarily want that sharp line over there. If we had a sharp line over there, that would be more like design and style as opposed to realism, let's say, or naturalism, whichever you want to call it. But in this case, I mean, they are 2 pretty distinctly different things, but so yeah, I'm not just gonna be too bothered about this this internal area here because I really am not seeing this edge clearly. It's basically a lost edge, and pretty much after this articulation we're just gonna tone this area in. We're gonna lose this edge of the leg anyway. It can be a good exercise to sort of find it as we did initially, but I don't really see the point in articulating it further since, you know, we're literally gonna lose all that information in a moment. That said, we can sharpen the outline a little bit. Just gonna simplify this foot a little bit since we don't really see a lot of information on there. Just keep it that way. Talking about the toe area basically here. A little bit too searchy for the articulation stage. Let's just roll that back a little bit and redo some things here. Also, let's clean up this bottom edge a little bit. All right, let's just define this foot a little bit more. Also, before we do that, actually, let's just not forget there is a cast shadow over here as well. We want to be using that as well to create an illusion of there being some kind of surface actually. And that cast shadow is coming from the heel being lifted, but there is an actual cast shadow on the ground here as well. We just want to have something like this going on where you can then sort of fuzz it out a little bit. Just sort of locks it into the viewer that there is an actual plane that she's standing on, not just floating in the air. So it's good that we put that in. And then we want to find this contour over here. Maybe actually let's not make that change. Let's just keep it the way it was. Just clean up our construction line first a little bit so we can actually see where we want to aim. As I said, it's pretty hard to decide on a smudge like that where the line is supposed to go, so let's just clear it up so we don't have to guess. Okay, I think we more or less went through the outline, but there's still some things we want to look at. This scapula here on the inside kind of has a little overlap there maybe, and it doesn't really curve too much that, so let's just not do that. This again is internal information, so we're probably gonna lose a lot of this line work to the modeling. Just good to keep in mind. Maybe we don't need to sharpen it like crazy. Also, we can articulate this hair a little bit. It's a bit fuzzy obviously on this edge here, but let's just sort of define where it goes first a little bit, so we don't have to sort of guess where we are putting the contour stopping points, let's say. And finally, I think this arm, and then we might be actually more or less there. Not crazy amounts happening here, but there is a little overlap happening here where the tricep tendon goes to the elbow over here. So I'm just trying to very slightly indicate that. Also something that we'll just probably lose to the modeling, but hey, you see it happening, might as well put it in. Maybe we'll then remember to put it back in later on. So maybe I brought this a little bit too high. It's not necessary to do that. It's a little bit lower. So yeah, that's probably it for that. It's just, I think we'll just go straight into the articulation of the shadows here. Now, important note for those of you who will be making the transfer, you can make articulation of the shadows with a similar very sharp line. If you just carry on with the same paper, you don't want to make it super sharp. You want to make it legible, sure, but the shadow edges don't need to be very sharp usually. Form shadows, that is. I might be taking a little bit of extra on here for the sliver of shadow we have, but I don't really mind that since we're gonna be working the big four modeling coming from that side over. So if we have a bit of extra shadow tone there, it just turns into, you know, a nice dark turning tone to emphasize the form for us there. It's good to try to, you know, think a little bit ahead as well, occasionally at least. All right. So there's that one. There's no like extreme shadows in terms of like it needing to be very accurate. Or let's say there's no like complicated shadow shapes, I feel like, on this figure. There might be some on the feet, but again, those partly get a bit more complicated because there's those veins that are distracting sort of from the big picture. Also, we see here, we see a little halftone catching a little bit of light, but it's again so dark. It's as dark pretty much as the small light we see in there. We're just going to leave it as a shadow shape. We can find that and it will sort of turn into a reflected light, or maybe just a little sliver of a halftone over there. But you know, we're artists, we can pick and choose what we want to put in, and as long as, you know, we have some kind of smart idea of why we're doing things, then should be fine. If I was your teacher and you could like really well sort of tell me why you're doing things, then maybe I would let you just go forth with your plans. But I guess I am your teacher now, but I still can't stop you from doing what you want. So okay, I think these shadows are a little wonky over here, so let's just take those down a little bit. A little bit too thick to my tastes. Okay. There's just barely any shadow on this foot over here on the left side, but we'll keep a sliver of it on there. So perhaps the shadow shape needs to move a little bit as well. Still not loving this foot shape. I think it's something we need to work on a little bit more. I think it's a little better in terms of size now, but still not really loving the shadow either. We'll just kind of group it with the other one underneath. Also looking more closely at the reference, there is a little bit of shadow here, which I like because we can then describe a little bit of the anatomy. Sort of defines a little bit of the muscles on the side of the foot here. And also I think there's just a little bit of a shadow over here somewhere. Just describing a little bit of the toes in there. But yeah, that's a pretty subtle thing. I just actually realized we skipped a step before, which was toning in the shadows. We're just gonna do that now. I'm not even following my own process, sorry. So the reason we would tone in the shadows is because we can then more easily tell their shapes apart from the rest. in all honesty, this wouldn't be necessary before the next stage, which is literally filling these shadows up with a darker tone, but let's just do it for the sake of discipline. Also, I want to fill with tone this cast shadow on the ground as well. Something on there as well. Okay, let's just find the hair in shadow, sort of bedbug line back in. As well as let's just find this little light shape back in there. Also, we can still, you know, separate this bit of the hair from the cast shadow on the back, which is going to be slightly soft. But you know, we're going to actually mask all that in the same tone in the next stage. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Okay. I don't really like how sharp this shadow edge is currently. It's sort of looking wrong, but we're gonna fill that out with a dark shadow tone in a moment, so I'll just let it be for now. Let's just go ahead and touch the edges a little bit, so get a nice clean result. Okay, so the drawing is a bit more legible now. I don't know, hopefully I didn't forget too many other things than the toning of the shadows. It would have made it a bit more legible earlier already, but I didn't really have too much difficulty in articulating this drawing. I mean, the toning in step is basically a step that is meant to help you find things. So yeah, if you skip it, then sure, doesn't really matter too much. But here I did it anyway before the next stage. All right, next up will be